Hi, I've no idea how long this video is going to be, but I thought I would make a video about ReviewTechUSA and Killer Comedy Unleashed, as I haven't made a video about those guys for a while. So last time we looked at ReviewTechUSA, I was basically saying that the main channel is dead, and that's not completely true. A couple of videos went up after the announcement that the live streams were going to be moving to a different channel, and that at some point we were going to have a new channel on Twitch, or a new show on Twitch that ReviewTechUSA was going to be putting together, and not any particular idea about when that was going to happen. Could be May, could be June. Flicking over to the Killer Comedy Unleashed channel, same old stuff, except that we've now got the words comical skit in brackets at the end of some of these videos. I'm a bit unclear about why he's added that. I haven't watched any of these videos, so I don't have any idea whether or not they're any good. One thing I did want to mention actually was the subscriber counts, which I thought was quite interesting. The last time we made a video about ReviewTechUSA, his subscriber count was 666,000, so 666,000. That number has now risen to 675,000, so he's gained about 9,000 subscribers. So that's fairly impressive, and he made remarks and overtures as well about this idea that the channel is actually recovering after some period of being in stagnation or losing subscribers, and he said in a live stream that he thinks the reason why that was happening was because of some of the E-drama. And there hasn't really been a lot of drama of late to discuss. Anna Doyle, as far as I'm aware, has been flagged, so that person isn't making videos at the moment. We might be able to have a quick look, actually. I thought I was subscribed to this channel. See you in 3 months. So it's been a month already, so in a couple of months that person will be back. Again, quite a lot of subscribers on that channel. I have watched a couple of the live streams from ReviewTechUSA on the new channel. They're okay, the same usual fare. I would recommend watching them because I enjoyed watching them. I wanted to talk to you about a different subject, because in a video, I made a video, it was to do with the Flat Earth conspiracy. And what I wanted to do was to move on from the Flat Earth conspiracy and to talk about a new topic that I mentioned I was going to do a video on at the end of the Flat Earth conspiracy video. And it was quite interesting. I was having a conversation with my boss today and about the apparent renewed interest in the Flat Earth conspiracy, and that I was basically making the argument that I was making again in the video, that actually in your day-to-day life experience the curvature of the Earth is not typically a factor. In fact, if you think about it, there are relatively few contexts in which the curvature of the Earth is an important everyday phenomenon. One of those is the observation of the boat, where the bottom of the boat appears to disappear as the view of the boat is obscured by the curvature of the Earth. At the end of my last video, I made some overtures towards ideas to do with nuclear weapons. And this is a particularly pertinent subject given that Donald Trump has now left the Iran deal, or rather the United States has now left the Iran deal, and that there is some renewed interest in Iran about building nuclear weapons. They are now restarting their uranium enrichment plants, etc. But it will take considerable amounts of time for them to have any kind of weapon, because as far as I understand it, that technology has not been developed there. Also, you'll notice if you look at the political situation, especially with North Korea being the preeminent example, if you do get to a point where you have weapons of mass destruction in the form of nuclear weapons, it appears to be the case that you will be invited into some sort of nuclear peace treaty, and North Korea has got a lot to gain from that. Whether or not Iran has the same to gain is something else. Now, what I wanted to discuss, and this is a kind of conspiracy theory idea, is that in the Cold War, there was this idea of mutually assured destruction, and that this was sold by the nuclear strategists to the American government as the idea of how exactly to manage the existence of nuclear weapons during the Cold War and in the nuclear age, and what exactly mutually assured destruction, or MAD, meant was that if the enemy was in possession of, so let's think about the Cold War context, where you have America and you have the Soviet Union, or Russia as it's today known, and they both theoretically, although there is some dispute about this, and I'll go into that a bit later in terms of discussing this theory, it was assumed by the nuclear strategists, and this was later disproven at least in the 1960s, that the enemy had a very large nuclear force, a large amount of nuclear weapons, that they would be able to, that they would be able to deliver these nuclear weapons and hit an enemy target, and that they would be delivered in such a way that if they wanted to attack that country, they would do so en masse. They would send all of their weapons to the enemy, let's say the United States. So in this particular situation, if the Soviet Union wanted to attack the United States, they would send all of their weapons at once, and that would assure them that the American threat would be destroyed. It was later proven, I think this is in the kind of 1950s and 1960s, that actually the Soviet Union didn't have that many weapons. They only had about 3 or 4 of them. They were incredibly expensive to develop. America, on the other hand, had very large amounts of nuclear weapons. And if you take the Cuban Missile Crisis as an example, the Soviet Union were about to park some weapons in Cuba, some nuclear weapons, with the intention of being able to threaten the United States relatively locally. And President Kennedy said, if you even try and do that, we will retaliate with our entire nuclear arsenal. And this was 1961, I want to say. 1960... because I think he died in 1963, so I think it was 1961. One of these resources was something called the Minuteman, and the Minuteman was a intercontinental ballistic missile, and we'll have a look into that a little bit later. And the general idea of the Minuteman is that it was a silo-based weapon, and it was stored underground. And this was useful in the sense that you could camouflage where the Minutemen were actually held. When you would put trees on top of it, or you could build astroturf on top of the silo lids. So it would be very difficult, even if you had satellites, to be able to determine where exactly the American nuclear arsenal was stored. This would later be replaced with a system that we have in the UK. I think America has actually got a 3-part system. They have a land-based system, a sea-based system, and an air-based system. The land-based system, what I mean by that is the Minutemen, or a more contemporary example. I think the Minutemen are still in service. So now in the UK we only have the submarine version, and the importance of having a submarine-based nuclear deterrent is because of a phenomenon called second strike. So what second strike basically means is that if you are attacked by the enemy and you are completely annihilated by their nuclear force, you have the ability to retaliate from beyond the grave, because the commanders on the submarines will be monitoring the situation. They will realise that the home state has been annihilated by the enemy. They will be able to determine who the enemy is, and they will retaliate with their weapons. So the UK and America have second strike capability, and having an alliance with either one of those countries means that you so like take Israel for example, or any of our other allies, they would have the ability, although I think Israel is actually an independent nuclear power, they would have the ability to retaliate as well. Now here's my question. Put yourself in the American government in the 1950s and the 1960s. Building nuclear weapons is extremely expensive. There is this idea that you should have a huge nuclear arsenal, because if you have a huge nuclear arsenal, you will be able to threaten the enemy with mutually assured destruction. Now, let's take a moment to consider the insanity of that situation, okay? So you are working in the American government, and in particular, I want to put you as an employee, somebody with influence in the, what I suppose in America would be the Treasury, where you control budgets. Now, when I say you control budgets, it's not just saying yes and no to things, because in America that doesn't work that way. A lot of this stuff has to go through Congress, and in order to get a mutually assured destruction plan or a massive nuclear arsenal in place, you would have to get approval from the Congress, and the Treasury would make a strong argument that this isn't actually necessary in a practical sense. Now, what I mean by that is, okay, you build a few prototypes, some Minutemen, some strategic bombs, some of these submarine examples as well, and you set them off and you've got a very large and impressive firework display. According to the mutually assured destruction thesis, you have the capacity for massive retaliation because you are concerned that your enemy are going to attack you first. And there were discussions within the American state, within the American government, about whether or not the enemy was rational. And what they mean by that is that whether or not the enemy is engaging in complex strategic thinking. Should we attack the enemy? Should we not attack the enemy? How many missiles should we have, etc.? Now, I think that at no point in the history of nuclear weapons did either the Soviet Union or the United States have the ability for massive retaliation. The reason is because if the Soviet Union attacked America en masse with its weapons and annihilated the United States, there is nobody left in the United States to give a shit about whether or not the Soviet Union rules the world. America has been completely annihilated. And the idea of having the ability to retaliate massively is exactly that. It is an idea. All you have to do is convince the enemy that you have the capacity for massive retaliation. You do not need it in a practical sense. That is the argument that if I was working for the Treasury, I would have made to Congress. I would have said, look, this is a move-counter-move situation where we have to convince the enemy that we have the ability for massive retaliation, and it is only through convincing them that we will be able to deter them from ever engaging in massive nuclear assault. Having massive amounts of nuclear weapons with which to retaliate is pointless. So I am speculating now that the United States or the Soviet Union, or possibly both, never had the reported historical figures of thousands of nuclear weapons. Because it wouldn't be necessary. All you would need is the threat of massive nuclear retaliation, and the idea of the Minuteman gives this threat. Okay, so this was a weapon that could be fired into space. It was ballistic, right? So it comes back in at an angle, and it would crash into it would blow up rather above the enemy territory. Polaris was the submarine replacement. I believe that's been replaced by something else now. So the Minuteman dates back to 1961, and actually Minuteman 3 is still in service. Think about this as well. Computers, and in particular kind of central processing units and memory for guidance systems, were extremely rudimentary, and it was only later that they started using transistors to build these kind of computers. And actually the age of computers was brought on by the development of military technology. So my thesis, if you want to put it that way, is that there was never a time in history when the capacity for massive retaliation was ever necessary. All that was necessary was convincing the enemy that you had these weapons. And that could be done through counterintelligence. And think of it this way: if you're the enemy, if you're the Soviet Union, for example, are you going to take the risk that the enemy don't have the capacity for massive retaliation? No. You're going to believe the counterintelligence, because that's what the war was all about. It was all about an information war. So how about that for a conspiracy theory? I wonder how many nuclear weapons there actually are worldwide. Tell you what, put my theory to one side, because the world is pretty insane, isn't it? I mean, if there was ever a time in history where there were thousands of nuclear missiles, thousands on the side of the West in the United States, and thousands in the Soviet Union in the East, and that at any point one belligerent power might attack the other, that would be a pretty fucked up world to live in. And I suppose this conspiracy theory postulates that the world ain't that fucked up. Leave a comment. I'd be interested to hear what you think.